Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach, everyone. In 2006, a friend of mine recommended a book, and because it was a friend whose book recommendations I trust implicitly, I read it. And then I gave it back. And I didn't say anything about it because, frankly, I really just didn't like the premise at all. Which was disappointing, because this was a friend whose book recommendations I respect. And just to be fair, it was beautifully written and very moving at times, but the whole concept was just psychologically and spiritually way off base for my own personal approach to life. Some weeks and then some months went by, and I just kept on living my life. But I noticed that book coming up more and more in different conversations, and then before I knew it, it was everywhere. Not just in book clubs or coming up at dinners, but plastered across social media, written up in every newspaper and blog, and then over a year or two, much to my dismay, it became a cultural tour de force. And for years, I've been hanging out in the background thinking that maybe I'm crazy. That maybe this really is some great life-changing book and that I just didn't get it, which is very possible, I will say for the record. But over the last couple of months, preparing for high holidays, and now in the midst of Sukkot, I've been thinking about this a lot. And I'd like to use this time this morning to defiantly and not so humbly argue that I, in fact, was and continue to be right. Because Eat, Pray, Love is a bad book. And to anyone who loves it, I apologize truly, I mean no offense. And again, it is lovely in a lot of different ways. Elizabeth Gilbert is a talented and beautiful writer, but let me kvetch for a second here, because I think that there's something important for us to take away, especially as it relates to Sukkot and this time of year that we're in our Jewish calendar. So for anyone who hasn't read the book or seen the movie, because yes, of course there was a movie, it was a cultural tour de force, the premise is that a woman recognizes that she's unhappy in general, in her life, in her marriage, in her work. And as she is trying to keep it together as her divorce is finalized, she decides to go on a journey to explore life outside of her status quo. And so she decides to go to 3 countries. And I don't know if it's intentional or coincidental, but all 3 countries start with an I. She goes to Italy to eat. She goes to India to pray. And she goes to Indonesia, where she falls in love and seemingly finds herself again. She eats, she prays, she loves. And she does it beautifully and compellingly. The author, Elizabeth Gilbert, does an incredible job of taking the reader on the journey with her, describing food in mouth-watering detail, opening her heart and making herself vulnerable to discuss the difficulty of prayer and trying to let go of ego, etc., etc. But here's my kvetch. I think it has become a paradigmatic trope of Western thought to, quote unquote, go find ourselves. That there is this big, beautiful world out there, and it has the answers to so many of our questions, to so many of our problems, our issues, our baggage. And so we believe that we need to make these pilgrimages of enlightenment, these journeys to find out who we are. And to give that philosophy some credit, there's a lot that we can learn from getting out of our comfort zones, from getting out of the backdrop of our everyday lives and seeing the great, beautiful diversity that exists on our planet. Travel and exploration is important, and we should all make time to do it. But, probably expected that there was a but coming, but if there is one major philosophical and theological element that comes from this holiday of Sukkot, it is this: joy, gratitude, love, holiness, they're not hidden in this world for us to find. No matter where we go, we are still who we are, baggage and all. Our issues come with us, our insecurities, our hang-ups. We can't leave them at home when we depart to find ourselves. The path to enlightenment and to happiness is right here. It's scattered in different pieces at our feet, and in order to see that path in its entirety, we have to put it together. We have to build a sukkah. We have to create the divine in our lives. Remember, the mitzvah to start building our Sukkot comes immediately following Yom Kippur. We've just spent 25 hours in awesome closeness to God. We've prayed, we've confessed, we've opened our hearts. And in the wake of that intense day, we are asked to do one very important thing. Yes, we need to go home and we need to break fast and eat some food, but then immediately after, we need to go start building our sukkah. Because as a reminder, Sukkot is not about recreating our ancestors' journeys through the wilderness. We tend to teach that to our kids because we erroneously believe that they can't understand more advanced theology. But our Sukkot are not meant to be recreations of our ancestors' booths in the wilderness, because not only did they not have access to wood and trees in the Midbar, in the desert, but the Talmud tells us explicitly that these Sukkot, these booths, are supposed to represent one thing and one thing only: the dwelling place of the divine. God's home. Our Sukkot represent God's home. The Ananei Kavod, the clouds of glory that protected our ancestors through their journey in the Midbar and beyond. The same presence of God that helped them establish autonomy in our ancestral homeland, and the same presence of God that followed them into Galut when autonomy was violently destroyed. We build our Sukkot to remember that while God can exist in all time and in all space, there's no way for us to acknowledge that existence unless we make room for God to enter. We don't need to find God, because God isn't hiding. We need to build a place for God in our lives, and then we can see things with so much more clarity, with so much more compassion, with so much more patience and love. And that is what Sukkot is all about. To recognize that Zman Simchatenu, that this moment of joy isn't discovered or stumbled across or sought out. It's built. It's built. We build it. We come together. We share in food and drink, but more importantly, we share in stories, in laughter, in moments of honesty and truth, and in our building, we create meaning. And that is also the ikar, it is also the essence of Jewish life in general. That when we are in moments that are hard, that are painful, that are challenging, we don't run away like Jonah, whose story we read on Yom Kippur. We have to come back like Yaakov, who returned home to wrestle with God so that he could rebuild his relationship with his brother, with his family, and with himself, so that he could be blessed. But more importantly, so that he could see that blessing, so that he could understand that that blessing was there all along. My friends, we are builders. We are commanded to be builders. But we are also recipients of a beautiful gift, which is the promise that with our building comes meaning. And so this morning on Chol HaMoed Sukkot, on Shabbat, I say, Miss Gilbert, I'm sorry I didn't like your book. It really was very beautiful. But I hope that you can understand that for us, as Jews, we don't have to go anywhere to eat, pray, and love. We just have to build a sukkah, a physical one, a spiritual one, and little tiny ones that we are invited to build in countless moments each and every single day of our lives. And I love that about us. And I can't wait for us to keep building through the remainder of this holiday and beyond. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach, and we'll continue now with our Musaf service.